Good evening, everyone. I hope you're all excited for another wonderful week of learning Japanese. Um, as always, as I like to remind everyone, I guess as always, even though I only streamed once, I will preface this by saying that I am as much of a student as a lot of other people are when it comes to learning Japanese. The purpose of these streams is for me to essentially take my own studies and share what I've learned with everyone else. Maybe teaching it in the way that I've learned will help other people gain an understanding of the language, gain an understanding of maybe the writing system or certain grammar rules. So, they do say that one of the best ways to retain information that you learn is by teaching it. So that's a big part of why I'm motivated to do this. So, for those of you who were here last week, I hope you studied up your hiragana and katakana tables. That's really all we went over, so if you're new here, don't worry about it. I just talked about some of the basic rules of the writing system in Japanese, and today what we're going to do is actually sort of get into the grammar of Japanese, very basic grammar. So even if you didn't learn the characters and the way we write in Japanese, it's fine. I'm going to, for the most part, for a lot of these lessons, still be including essentially the English pronunciation of a lot of these words, of a lot of these characters, so you can learn as we go along here. I'm not going to stop doing that for a while, so even if you just read the Romaji, you'll still be able to get a feel of certain rules in the language. Good evening, Siren. I'm glad to see you here. My mic is off. Is it? You can't hear me. Let me record. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, testing. That's weird. Let me check this real quick. It seems to work in the recording. So, I don't understand what the problem is. Properties, microphone. I had a noise filter on. Let me see. Properties. Is this? That's audio output. Wait, what? Microphone done. Filters. Can you hear me now? Is this better? That's so strange. Are you sure you don't have your stream muted? Huh. I don't know what's going on with that. Like, can you hear the music but not me? How about now? Can you hear anything? Did you have it muted? I think that might have been the case, maybe. Don't worry about it. It's always important to make sure that everyone participating can listen, so it's fine. I do want to turn back my filter though, that noise gate, just because there's some outside noise that I'd like to make sure isn't caught. Alright. So, without further ado, let's get started on today's lesson. So today, what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about a basic grammar, a piece of grammar in Japanese. Used a lot. It's not something we have a particular equivalent to in the English language. And we're going to talk about what we call particles. So what a particle is essentially, it's a character that we use to sort of give context based on the words that we're using. And I think the best way to talk about this is to sort of give an example here. And to do this, I'm going to talk about... Let's use a basic statement like this. Let me say... I use this statement here. I say, boku wa eri o. So this sentence here says, boku wa Idiot. Ooh, I can't spell. And what this means here, this translates to I am Elliot. And let's break this sentence down into some basic terms here, some basic translations here. Obviously, Erioto, which is written in katakana, that's just my name. This kanji here, boku, as you guys may know from popular anime or other Japanese media, boku is one of the various words that you can use to refer to yourself. It's typically a more masculine reference for self-reference. So that is the I here. And then we have these two terms here. Let me change the color. We have the wa and the dis. So it's hard to make a straight comparison in English to what this is, because again, the direct translation in English is just 3 words as opposed to these 4 pieces here. What it is, the particle wa, which is actually, if you remember from the katakana lesson and the hiragana lesson from last week, this character, it is typically pronounced ha. Like, if we were to talk about, say, the term like hatsune, a popular Vocaloid Hatsune Miku, that's the character that we use. But this is a specific case here that whenever we connect using this sort of particle, and we're going to use a lot of examples, a lot of sentences, we're going to build a lot of these sentences, but typically this is pronounced ha. But in the case of connecting 2 thoughts, like connecting the I with my name, that's the wa. It's a specific pronunciation. And as we go through some particles, you'll see that that concept does pop up a couple of times, where the particle version of a character is pronounced differently from the actual pronunciation of the word. And that's something that you have to look out for. This specific particle, though, essentially what it talks about, what the meaning of it is sort of like the state of being. Think about it like, in English, our words like, we say, you are, I am, he or she is. I'm trying to think. Yeah. So this word, the wa, is the closest comparison I could come up with, like that I could explain to you what this means. It's a comparison to this. You are, am, is, these words here. It's telling you that something is something. However, there's also this term here at the end, this des, which, again, pronunciation rules, we don't need to pronounce that U at the end. It's just boku wa erioto desu. So, this here, it's really hard at this point, at an introduction, to sort of explain what the purpose of desu is, or des is, but you sort of use it to like mark the end of your sentence. Because unlike in English where are, am, and is, these they change the talking about others. What works with? Yeah, correct. So unlike in English where we have I am, you are, he, she is, I could say boku wa, I could say kimi wa, I could say kanojo wa if I'm referring to a girl, kare wa if I'm referring to a boy. This here, the wa, refers to any object or any person. So as opposed to having different conjugations, different versions of it based on the context, it's always going to just be wa. And what it is that in English, are, am, and is, these are verbs. They tell us that even though it's not a specific action, it's a state of being. Wa isn't a verb, so des sort of has a place there, as works sort of like a placeholder for the lack of a verb there, and it tells us that that's like the end of the sentence. And for all intents and purposes, for all of the stuff that I talk about, this is all in reference to formal writing, to things that are written out, things that you see like in books. Obviously, the way we talk in English and the way that it's written in like novels or in academia, there's differences. There's colloquial speaking, there's like slang, there's casual conversational English, and there's the formal English that we talk in when we're reading a book or writing a paper. So a lot of this, there's obviously exceptions for conversational Japanese, but this is sort of to get an idea of the structure of the language first and foremost. So you'll see a lot of examples as we go through lessons. Other ways that we end sentences, like if I have a verb, like a direct verb, like if I say let's go, usually the sentence ends with this like iki. This is like a sentence, or this would be saying let's go. You would be saying ikimasu. Typically a lot of sentences end with that u sound, but that's a rule that there's a lot that I would have to explain to fully wrap around all of this. So what I just want to focus on is just, for now, we're going to be ending a lot of these sentences with this, and that just serves as a sort of again, it's just to state of being. There's no literal translation here. Right, an affirmation, a sort of... It's sort of to finish up that the concept of something being something, that something is something. It's that connection there. So like when I say a sentence like this, let me make a new layer. Change back to white. Let's say... Because typically, you could say something like, let's say, sentence here. You could say this sentence here, and then the following sentence that I'm writing out. This says, this would be written out in hiragana as otoko wa kakusei. And we have to end that sentence with this. And what this sentence means, otoko is boy, so we would say the boy, the wa is our is, and gakusei is a student. So the sentence reads out as otoko wa gakusei desu, or the boy is a student. That wa telling us that the boy is. And the desu being that sort of ending that sentence due to the lack of a verb to indicate any sort of action. This is sort of an affirmation or that state of being. So again, that's what a particle is. There's multiple different kinds of particles in Japanese. Wa represents the state of being, and the other particle today that we're going to talk about is going to be one that represents possession. But before we do that, we're going to talk about this next. Looking at the sentence, I have otoko wa gakusei desu, which is just the boy is a student. In Japanese, the way we ask questions is a little different than how we ask questions in English. In English, we would say something like, is the boy a student? We would swap is to the front of the sentence, and we would add a question mark. Is the boy a student? Question mark. So we start sort of with that questioning word at the start of our sentence. You could ask a question like, what time is it? We would say like, where is the bathroom? All these questions in English typically start with one of the 5 W's, like who, what, where, when, why. Or things like this sentence here, this is, usually that's a yes or no question. In Japanese, all we would do to make it a question is the following. There's no specific kind of questioning, like there's no 5 W's for like the who, what, where, when, why. All we have to do is the following. Otoko wa gakusei desu ka? And this, the ka, is turns statement to question. So in this case here, the sentence would read out as, is the boy a student? Otoko wa gakusei desu ka? And you would have that your inflection also rise up at the end. Kind of like how in English we would say, is the boy a student? You have to, that inflection also helps you express that this is a question you're asking. So there's nothing that changes except for the ka at the end. You could say any kind of statement, but the word that you use, the term that we use in order to indicate that you're asking something is the ka at the end. So I could ask something like, if we make the comparison here, hey, look. We could say something like following. If I wrote just, actually do this in a new layer. I wrote Gohan wa nan desu ka? So case like this, you can see this question is asking Gohan. This is meal. Here, this is, again, is. And this is a very common kanji that you may or may not know. This is what? It could be what, who, where, when, why, but this is the kanji for nani, which essentially just serves as a universal questioning term, as opposed to English where sort of we have who, what, where, when, why. We use different forms, similar forms of nan, in order to express that we are asking a kind of question that isn't yes or no, but rather can be answered with different answers, multiple different answers. I realized I wrote this wrong. This. So, Gohan wa nan desu ka? And that's how we would emote an answer like that. So we break it down. Gohan talks about the meal. Wa asking us, is that term for is, that state of being? And the nan desu ka, that really the whole thing here serves as the what part of it. So formally this would be, what is the meal? Or if we want to say it in a term that makes more sense in our language, it would be something similar to like, what is for dinner, lunch, breakfast, etc. Right? And again, it's because we have that ka at the end that we know that this is going to be a question. Let me see. Or I could say something like the following. If I do this. There's no need for a quiz. I'm not going to be quizzing anyone on this. It's all just study and review material. So this here, Kanji desu ka? Actually, not like this. Write it just so that it's in a similar format to everything else. If I ask you the question, something like, keep on drawing lines there. I say, Ima wa nan ji that one looks a little weird. This. Yes, that first kanji is now. This says Ima wa nan ji and the translation of this would be following. Ima means now. Again, wa, that is. Nanji refers to specifically what time. So the sentence here, Ima wa nanji desu ka, would be telling us, or it would be asking someone, what time is it? And then you could answer something like the following. Ima wa, say something like uji this. Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I didn't mention that. Unlike English, English has question marks when we ask questions, and that's usually to denote that we are asking a question. But for Japanese, the ka is all we need in order to know that this is a question. When you end a sentence with ka, that lets us know that we are asking a question about something. In the case here, with the response, we see that it ends with this, as opposed to desu ka, so we know that it's a statement. And this just means now. It, that state of being, currently is 10 o'clock. So essentially the question would be saying, if you say, Ima wa nanji desu ka? you would be asking, what time is it right now? And the response here, ima wa 10 desu, would be saying, it is now 10 o'clock. How do you write 10 o'clock? So it would look like, in hiragana, it would look like ima wa 10. I feel like my brush is a little too thick to write out the little U's. Force experience keeps opening up when I hit undo. G. This. So 10 o'clock would just be Juji. For Ju being 10, G being time. And we're going to talk more about the numbers as well. I'm going to go in depth on what those all represent. So that's the particle wa, and that is the question. This is some basic stuff. So if you wanted to introduce yourself, if I wanted to introduce myself, I could be like, boku wa Erioto desu. And if I wanted to ask someone something like, what is your name? I could do the following. Instructions. You would say... I actually didn't write this in my notes, so forgive me if I mess up the kanji here. Let me just check to make sure. I don't want to be writing this out and it being completely wrong. Yeah, I got 2 strokes wrong. It is... And the reason why I'm choosing to write out the kanji that I'm writing out is that these are common kanji that you'll see a lot. This is name, namae. Wa. You could ask something like this. This wasn't in the textbook, so this might be impolite. I just thought of this I just thought of this like suddenly. This would be my wa. Ooh, why am I writing that in kanji again? On this. Ooh, and I forgot to write the questioning statement. Has to be ka. So this is asking, what is your name? So again, namae wa nan desu ka? That is asking, what is your name? Is it wrong if we add the question mark? Does it look bad? I think from what I've seen, just like on social media and everything, I believe I have seen question marks being added before. So it's not wrong. It's just not necessary. So either way, if you do it or don't, there's nothing wrong with that. So if you think it'll be clear to more people, you want to like, I don't know, maybe if you were hosting an international crowd, wasn't familiar with it, it would be obvious that is a question. But it's not grammatically incorrect from what I've seen to use the period instead of the question mark. Alright. The way the book that I studied off of, the way it segmented everything was a little weird, so I'm gonna change how they do that. Instead of talking about introductions, I'm gonna leave all the introductions and phrases for the end. And I want to talk next about the following particle. We talked about the state of being, wa. We talked about how it tells us something is something or what something is. The next particle that we're going to talk about, the second one that we're going to talk about for today, is the particle or the sentence structure A, O, E. And what this represents possession. or relation. Close that Streamlabs for a sec. So let's talk about this. What this sentence is, and the term no is actually fairly common. I feel like you see that a lot, like a lot of media. You think about anime names, you think about like Boku no Hero Academia, My Hero Academia, Kimetsu no Yaiba, which actually they just call it Demon Slayer. I don't think that's the literal translation of it. Think about like Your Name, Kimi no Na wa. The Kimi and then no Na, the Na that being the name, your name. So let's talk about the structure here. When I say something like Dev Tanaka, let's say we're talking about someone named Tanaka. No. Oto-san. So if I talk about something like this, Tanaka no Oto-san, this is Tanaka's father. And the way the structure works, whenever I use the no particle, the B is sort of like the main term, the main idea here. So since we say no otosan, that means we're talking about a father. That means that the father is the main idea of this combination here. While A is sort of like the restriction. So we know, since it says no otosan, we know that they're talking about someone's father. The first term that comes before the no that tells us whose father we're talking about. So Tanaka no otosan would be Tanaka's father. That's why we wouldn't say the other way around. Oto-san no Tanaka. If we said something like this, this would sort of be like father's Tanaka. Since no Tanaka would be that main idea that we're talking about Tanaka, the possession, that restriction, is that it's the father's Tanaka. It does sound weird. It's like there's like a lot of weird ways. Like if I said this, it's like you're sounding like very possessive of that person, and that's not what we want. So the order is important. The second term here, that second term is sort of the main idea of what we're talking about here. If I say this, it says that we're talking about the Tanaka owned by the father, essentially, or Tanaka from the father, as opposed to the father of Tanaka. Reversed, it just sounds really weird. Let's look at some other examples of this. And in some cases it doesn't sound particularly weird, but it's important to see sort of like the idea behind the ordering. You can try to make a sentence. While I write this out, you can also write your own. Watashi no tomodachi no namae wa Erioto. Right. So the name of my friend, considering you use two no's, it's saying the name is the main point, and then connecting that. Actually, I want to write that one out. It's a good one. So I'll write this out in hiragana for now. Watashi no Tomo namae wa eri o. So this is a very good one actually, because as you can see, the usage of the no particle is here twice. So we have to break this down into two parts. Like I said, the second term is that main idea. So we say the name being the main point. And then prior to that, watashi no tomodachi, friend, my. So the name is the most important part of the sentence here. We're talking about someone's name. The person that we're talking about is your friend. So in this first part here, the friend is the main topic, and you're talking about a friend of yours. So this ends up being my friend's name is Elliot. A very good sentence. And that's really what that no is. It sort of connects two ideas, with the main idea being that second term. So those are the two main particles we're talking about today, the wa and the no. And also one thing I want to point out, sorry. So here, this is actually the character wa. This here is ha, read out as wa. So despite the fact that we know that this is a character ha, in the usage of a sentence, in the usage as a particle, it's pronounced as wa. In the future, we're going to talk about some other cases here, and now that we've gone over some particles, I feel like it makes a little bit more sense for me to explain that. The particle for movement, he, this is pronounced as he. This is read as he, but pronounced as he. When? I think next week's lesson talks about this, there, or this, that, and that. So I think the next particle lesson comes in 2 weeks. There's also wo. This is wo, pronounced as wo. And you see this a lot. You'll see it a lot when you look at romanized lyrics for Japanese songs, that instead of writing out the he as he, they write it out as e, or the wo will be pronounced as o. Like in the popular Queen song Te o Toreate would be written out as te, o. But spoken out, it sounds like te o. So those are some other examples of particles, some of characters that get pronounced differently than they're actually written out. So that's enough for the particles. What I want to get to next is talking about some basic introductions, because there's some rules that may or may not be common knowledge, and I want to talk about those. Let me clear this out. And let's talk about some basic introductory things. The first one being this. This is Ohio. This is Ohio versus, let's say, Ohio. So the difference between these two, because you see these a lot, you see it said a lot. Ohayo, the difference, these both mean good morning. But the left one, Ohayo, is more casual, while the right one is more formal. Something like Ohayo gozaimasu, you would say to like someone that you don't know or someone that you just met, someone that you respect. While casual, you're just hanging out with your friends, you just see them, you say Ohayo, as opposed to Ohayo gozaimasu to someone that you respect, or to someone that you don't want to be disrespectful to. And that's the same case with well, that's also another case of like formality and being like a little bit more casual. It's actually, typically, we don't actually need to say stuff like watashi no or like boku no. Usually, we only refer to pronouns like I, you, or me. Things like kimi wa, anata wa. It's only ever really needed to be used if it's not obvious that we're talking about said person. And I could touch upon that some more as well. I think I will once I go through these introductions. But you're correct. Saying just namae wa blank as opposed to watashi no namae is a case of formality or informality as well as the context being known. It would be very formal to say watashi no namae as opposed to just namae wa. So that this gozaimasu here for introductions, this is something that we add on as a sort of formality, similar to arigato versus arigato. So again, it's that same idea here, that arigato, that's more casual, while arigato gozaimasu, usually like you're thanking like maybe like a teacher or maybe like a service worker, someone that you don't know, as opposed to like maybe your friend doing you a favor, you just say arigato, as opposed to the arigato gozaimasu of like checking out at a store and the cashier bags all your groceries. So that's the real difference. And you see both used a lot, but that's really the only what adding gozaimasu changes to that greeting or thanks. Ooh, that's a good one. So it's actually just itadakimasu. It's just itadakimasu. So this here, for those of you who don't know, it just means, it's sort of like saying thanks for the food, and there's no different form for this. There's no like gozaimasu here, it's just one term here, itadakimasu. And that's just what you say right before a meal. Sort of like how some people in overseas, maybe some people who are like more religious, have people pray for their meal. In Japan, before a meal you say itadakimasu. Let me just go over some other terms that are very commonly used that just like clear up their meanings as well. If we say something like this, if I say something like Sumimasen, commonly it's known that this is used for excuse me. Actually, let me write that out. I've been like neglecting to do this. You say excuse me, but it also, you could say sumimasen if, as a sort of apology, if you think that you've troubled someone. sort of like a pardon me kind of thing. Like if you inconvenience someone. So it's like sorry for the inconvenience, and it also can be used as a sort of a thank you. Again, Sumimasen deshita. So that's a good question as well. One sec. So deshita, this specifically here, and this is going to be something that we get more into when we talk about past and present tense, but deshita is, I believe, unless I'm mistaking something because I might be off with my studies, deshita is a past tense. It's sort of a past tense for... It's a past tense version of this. And there's a lot that goes with, like, present tense, past tense, but essentially it's another, like, sentence ender kind of thing, like how I said that in formal writing, in, like, books and stuff, in proper sentence structure, you would want to end with some kind of a verb, and how des acts as that verb for the wa particle. Deshita would be the same thing, but for that past tense. So I believe sumimasen deshita would be referring to, like, thanking someone for something done in the past recently. But that's not something that I am fully 100% certain on, so I don't want to just say that with any sort of authority. Not that I can be saying anything here with authority. But I'm not too sure on that one. Alright. And so, one last thing I want to talk about. We know that, or not one last thing, we're going to keep on going. We know that there is I, and we know that there is ye, and typically the most common usage of these two terms is yes and no, or an affirmation, or a negation. So we're saying that it isn't correct. So, for example, yeah. Typically, like, if you're asked a yes or no question, you would say yeah, and you would say that that is not correct. That's a no. But it also can mean the following. Similar to English, how we say no problem or don't worry about it. Yeah can be used as a similar term. Like if someone says arigato, and you just, like, you think it's like no problem, it didn't bother you, you just be like, yeah. Or if someone says sumimasen, like, sorry for bothering you, you could just say, yeah, no problem, don't worry about it. Similarly, hi is an affirmation, but also can also be used if someone's calling for you, or if someone's, like, knocking at your door, and be used to signal your presence. Like if someone's calling roll call, or if, like, someone knocks at your door, you can say hi to let them know that you are there. So typically these words are also known for both yes and no. If you're reading a lot of choices, if you're, like, ever reading, like, an option in Japanese and it presents you with these two characters, or these two terms, hi and ie, That's yes and no. The confirmation and the non-confirmation. We have a couple more terms that I want to go through. Some very simple, like, just common things that you hear a lot. There is ano, which is usually used if like you're like nervous or you don't want to be imposing. This is typically used similar to in English, like sorry. It's like you don't know, like you don't want to like interrupt something, you don't want to like get in the middle of something. You'd be like ano, and sort of like you don't want to like rudely interrupt a conversation going on or anything, so that's what that means. Also, it's a little confusing because ano is a term that we talk about in the next lesson, I believe. But again, a big part of all languages is the context. So when you see someone starting off their sentence with like a trailing off ano like that, you know they're trying to like probably get your attention without being rude. So, trying to get someone's attention without being rude. Or not wanting to be rude, I should say. And then there is the following. There's this term here. Very commonly, the term sensei, we refer to teachers a lot with it. But sensei doesn't really just refer to like teachers or instructors. The literal translation for sensei is honorable master, or it's one translation of it, and it's usually used for people who hold some sort of like high amount of skill in a specific field, which is why teachers get referred to as sensei, because their skill is in a specific field that they teach. Doctors and professors also get referred to as sensei, and I mean even in like if you ever took karate or martial arts as a younger in your youth, oftentimes like Japanese martial arts, you'll refer to your instructor as sensei because they're someone who has mastered the craft that they are instructing. Otherwise, don't refer to self as sensei. It's usually apparently seen as... Right. There's a word for doctor. Or, yeah, like the medical doctor, specifically. So, like, someone who's in medicine, like when you go to, like, a hospital, like, and you're asking for, like, a diagnosis, you would refer to them as sensei. So, apparently, from what I've read in my studies, if you refer to yourself as a sensei, it seems like they see it as, it's seen as sort of arrogant. Like, it's something that you have people call you, not what you call yourself. It's like in the case of a teacher, we wouldn't call ourselves senseis, but if you refer to the specific job, that would be a... A teacher specifically would be referred to as a... Look like this. Obviously, this is only ever really used if, like, you're referring to yourself, like, what your job is. This is... Yoshi. That would be teacher. If I was to refer to myself as one, I would use that as opposed to saying that I am a sensei. And one last thing is that when you're talking to someone, words like you, when talking to someone, use their name, not you. So, for example, you know the word Kimi? This is Kimi. You would say Kimi no... Wait. Oh. My... One... This would be like the only kind of situation where you would use it, because you don't know what their name is. But let's say you do know what their name is. Let's say instead of Kimi no namae, you would say... I actually didn't write a very good example for this, so I'm not going to try to come up with one on the spot right now. I don't want to spend a lot of time fumbling around that. But essentially what it is, right? Kimi and anata, those are words that represent you. It represents the person that you're talking to. But it's more proper to use someone's name as opposed to saying you. So like, it's just, as long as you know their name, you would say their name in a sentence as opposed to Kimi or anata. The last thing that I want to talk about, very simple, and this is going to be a bit of a kanji learning practice here. So, talked about introductions, we talked about particles. The last thing I want to talk about is just something very basic that is important to learn, and something you'll see on a daily basis, and that is the numbers. So I just want to go through 1 through 10. One is ichi. Let me... I'm gonna like write a little sort of like barrier between them. So 1 is ichi. 2 is ni, which is just ni. 3, san, and 1, 2, and 3, very straightforward. 1 line, 2 line, 3 lines. Then we get to 4, and that is yon. 5 is go. 6 is doku. Looks like this. 7 is nana. 8 is hachi. 9 is Q. And 10 is Ju. So those are the counting numbers 1 through 10. And building up on that, very straightforward. Like, if I wanted to say 15, that would be 10 and then 5, or jugo. The table itself for numbers is a lot to go through, but it's important to be able to at least recognize the numbers 1 through 9. So we have ich, ni, san, chi, go, roku, nana, hachi, kyu, and ju. And another important thing is that, much like in English, how we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then different terms for counting, like, say, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and so on, there are a lot of different terms that end up getting referred to for different numbers. For example, number 4 can be yon, but it's also shi. Number 7 is nana, or shichi. 9 is sometimes just hu. And it is kind of hard. I will say that you sort of learn the different patterns as you study, and like the different sort of like exceptions and cases. For example, if I look at 1, it's ichi, but a lot of 1s actually have different terms for being like the first of something. Like if I say one thing, let me write this on a new layer. So like something like 1 o'clock. That's just ichi. But if I say 1 book, that ends up turning into something like e. Instead of ichi, it's e, and then the extended consonant satsu, isatsu, where the chi gets turned into a lengthened consonant. A lot of 1s do start with that e, and either will be ichi or e with an extended consonant, but then you get into certain common things, like if I say just one general thing, you'd think that it would start with an e, but it actually is e, o, and if I say one person, that's he, o, he. And the reason for this, if you remember, if you were here last week, characters in Japanese have different readings based on the new Japanese reading or the original Chinese reading from the characters that they were taken from. For example, 1, 2, 3 is Ichi-ni-san. But also can be he, u, mi. Which, if you notice, that he is where one person or one thing they get their naming convention off of. So it's important to know the different naming conventions as well, the Chinese versions, I guess you could say, of these letters. And this also is something that happens, something that you pick up on if you use any kanji learning app, like I mentioned last week, like using Anki or Wanekani. They do go into alternate readings of a lot of these kanji. So a lot of that practice, you sort of just get used to seeing and understanding why words are read the way they are. And a lot of that just boils down to memorization. I think that's all I have for today. I think that's really all I wanted to talk about, were mainly the particles and a little bit on introductions. It's very hard to get into the grammar rules of a language like Japanese. Right. Stroke order is a very big part of learning Japanese. Some people will tell you that you don't need to learn how to write it out and that everything is online anyway. But for me personally, I've found that I've had a greater success in memorizing and knowing the kanji when I learn how to write it. And learning how to write it in the right order, I feel is important because when you don't know the right order, you end up drawing it really weirdly. I think the biggest example for me personally, when I was learning how to write out characters in Japanese, was the character se. Actually, se looks like this. You draw the horizontal line, you draw that little there, you draw that there. That's the character for se. When I was starting, I wasn't paying too much attention to stroke order, so I was doing like this, and then like that, and then when I draw the line through, it seemed a little like weirdly spaced. Part of the reason why stroke order I feel like exists is because it sort of builds on the characters in a fairly logical way. Like with se, it gives you a way to sort of figure out where the characters, where these two vertical looking lines get drawn by having that horizontal line first be a sort of marking there. So I use that horizontal line as a marker. I know how long to make my short line, and I can properly space it with the longer line. Thinking about some other characters, like if I think about like the character for big, similarly it starts with a horizontal line, and then you make one curve like that, and the second curve actually goes from the intersection here, as opposed to say drawing it out like person and drawing a line horizontally. I feel like knowing the stroke order sort of makes things look connected in a way that's consistently more cohesive. Or like fire being, you draw like that, and then you draw your little markings there. When I first started learning how to write kanji, it took a bit for me to get the stroke order, but it really didn't take too long. It really does change like the essence of it. Like the whole flow of the image of the symbol is really like, it's visible to see, like even comparing like these two here to the one that I drew on the bottom here, or like these two together, you can really see like how the order really changes up the flow, or like the visual like clarity of the image. But as you practice kanji, I think it only took me like, so when I first started learning kanji, I was learning based off of like the kanji you learn in first grade and then moved on to second grade. And once I got to like the second grade level kanji, the more kanji that I was learning and teaching myself, the more I was able to like figure out the stroke order without having to actually refer to it. I'd like write it out, and then I'd wonder, I think I did that correctly. And then I'd look at the actual like stroke guide, and because there's a lot of repetition in kanji and like the shapes and patterns, you will sort of be able to visualize and understand those patterns as well. So it's a lot of practice. So I would recommend looking into like studying on Wanikani, or even just looking up the list of like kanji by grade and studying on that. I think they're good ways to sort of get an idea on how to visualize different characters. And I think that's really it for today. I went over all that I planned. I hope that those of you in chat who are here, lurking or not, enjoyed the lesson and got something out of it. Next week I'll be streaming at the same time, 6 p.m. EST. And if I don't see you until then, have a great week. Consider dropping a follow if you haven't followed already, and I'll see you all then. Thank you for tuning in.